All right, everyone, we're here with John Shane from the Keto Road. John, I'm so excited for this conversation. So excited to get you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. We were talking before we started, and I love how we resonate. So I'm really excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I was on your podcast recently, and when I was listening to the full version of it on your show, which I I was telling you also that I feel like I want that podcast to be on my show as well, because it's the messages that we were both talking about, I think are so important and so nuanced and so needed in this like low carb type of space that we're in. And I love that you said that you felt like I was a female version of you and that we were just so connected on the same page. And perhaps that's because we were both trained as functional nutritional therapy practitioners. And we learned that, each person is bioindividual and that there's not this one size fits all, and that the devil's in the details. There are these nuances and there are changes that are needed over time. And there's just so many different details that are not like we're able to put on an Instagram post that's going to go viral, because it's like, well, this person needs this and this one needs that. And so we're really into connecting, getting that message out there, that it's not just this, like, just cut out carbs. Like, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be easy? So John, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got to where you are today? And yeah, we'll just take it from there.
Absolutely. So my journey starts when I was a young 14-year-old at the whopping weight of 260 pounds. I was an emotional eater growing up, very much so. My family, my parents divorced when I was two. My mom definitely, I went and saw my dad, lived with my dad a couple times, but definitely had this special relationship. Definitely, I'm a mama's boy through and through. And my mom had emotional eating things that she's had to work through. And I picked up on it when I was younger. And so I was an emotional eater. I felt like my life was extremely out of sight of my control. And I felt like food was the one thing, hand to mouth was something I could control. So super big at a young age. Went to the doctor when I was 14, got on the scale. It was said 259 exactly. And I went into the room, and she told me that, hey, like, you're extremely overweight, you're extremely unhealthy, you're killing yourself. And at the time, I had not been playing football for a week because I'd broken my hand, and I could still feel the bumps right now as I say that. And I had this cast on, and I remember, I don't know what clicked in me, but at that point I was like, I'm over this. I'm done being fat. And so I went home and I picked a protein powder on the way home, and I ran 2 miles at 260 pounds, not doing any cardio. And I remember like almost wanting to puke. I remember falling. I remember getting home and trying to make a protein shake of spinach, skim milk, bananas, and protein, and like slicing my finger because I was having a hypoglycemic episode because I was just that unhealthy. I remember all that, like, to this day. And so I lost all the weight. It was about, I would say I went from 260 to 180 over the course of about 18 to 20 months. But something bad that happened was I got bullied a lot, and people stopped bullying me when I got skinny. So there was this deep association I developed of like social acceptance and my weight. And I didn't like who I was at all. I wasn't at that point where I understood this about myself, but at the time, looking back, I did not like who I was. And so I really depended on that social acceptance, like, to feel validated. And so I got really scared of gaining weight. And at the time I was just malnourishing myself. That's how I was losing weight. And so I started having like binge urges and giving into those urges. And there was so much going on biologically and psychologically for such a young human being. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I remember after one big pizza, my mom used to order pizzas, and she'd eat a whole pizza and I'd eat a whole pizza, and it was great. I made myself throw up. And I just realized I got on the scale the next day, and I weighed less than I weighed the day before. And just instantly there was this validation of like, I can eat what I want and I can keep the weight off. And so it started like once a week I would binge and purge. And then next thing I know, I got really addicted to the purging, and it was just jacking up my hormones so much that, like, if I saw a scale jump up because of sodium or any kind of thing, the scale went up at all, I was throwing up. And so I got to the point where, like, I was throwing up at school, I was throwing up at home. I was, there were days, like, I remember waking up and not being able to drink water because my throat was so jacked up that, like, it hurt to even drink like water. So it just got really bad. And then when I was 16, I know I tried to do an elevator speech and it always takes longer than I wanted to, but when I
No,
was
I like
16,
it. I like it.
I found my faith. I became a Christian, and I wasn't raised in the church, but it was a big deal for me in this particular part of my story because it was the first thing that I had that gave me value outside of myself. Like there was someone saying, you're worth something because I say you're worth something. And because I did this thing for you, I died for you, right? It's not on you. Um, and there was something about that that just absolutely like changed the way I looked at myself. I didn't love myself yet, but I realized I couldn't just keep beating myself up. And so, cause I belonged to somebody that thought I was worth something. And so that kind of started the war against my eating disorder. And so it went from like every day to like every 3 months, every 4 months. And then, I got married at 20, continued. I remember I'd throw up and then my wife would find like, I thought I did a good job of cleaning the toilet and she'd walk in and go, did you throw up? And I'm just like she'd always find it, irritated me. And then in 2017, I fell upon keto. I was in one of my yo-yo dieting phases of like, I was convinced it was like my bulks were like 3-month long binges. And then I would do like crash diets and lose it all. And that was like how I like bulked and cutted. And I was in one of my cuts and I couldn't lose the weight. And I found like a Brandon Carter video, the Keto King guy. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So I tried keto. And I did. I got super lean and it was great. And then I decided I just like the way I felt. I cheated twice. I cheated with Domino's Pizza, extra large Brooklyn style meat lovers with a butter beer. And I felt terrible. I ate the whole thing and I felt like garbage. And then and then Christmas Eve of 2017, I had Christmas cookies. I went keto all dinner and I had Christmas cookies and they jacked me up. And I just woke up the next day with a hangover almost. And I was just like, this is dumb. Why would I do this? To feel this bad? This is stupid. So I just said at that point, I was going to stick to clean foods and I never went back. And so I decided to bodybuild on keto, right? I worked with a guy named Robert Sykes, Keto Savage, great dude.
Yeah, he was on the
Worked with him
podcast.
and, that went great. And then on the reverse diet portion of a bodybuilding cut, it's really hard if you're not ready for it. And I struggled with it. And so I started having binging episodes again. And when I start binging, my immediate response mentally is to purge. And it was September 15th of 2018. I remember I ate a half gallon, it was 2 pounds of keto ice cream. It was like, I don't know, 5,000 calories. I ate it in like 3 minutes. I just ate the entire thing, freaked me out. So I went and made myself throw up. And I just realized I hadn't thrown up in 9 months, which is the longest I've ever gone without throwing up. So like I realized that like keto was doing something. There was definitely something about the kind of foods and how they were triggering me, but I didn't understand. Like I realized that wasn't enough. And so I remember I pulled out my phone and I was on my Instagram. I didn't have a big Instagram at this time. I had like 300 followers. I was nobody. And I was like, all right, guys. So I just made myself throw up and I just like said it really loud, like on out in the public. And that kind of is what started this whole thing, was like people started to resonate with a guy that was willing to open up about his body dysmorphia and his bulimia and walk them through that struggle. Like the OG people that have followed me forever, like they know that whole story. Like they knew me when I was struggling with bulimia and where I'm at now, that was my last relapse. So that was 4 years ago. So in September, it'll be 5 years. And yeah, I just started that's when I became really obsessed with holistic health. And then I wanted to understand the why. I understood the what, but I wanted to understand the why. So I wanted to go to school. So I found the Nutritional Therapy Association and I was obsessed with it. Like I obsessed over that school. Like
I loved it. Yeah,
completely changed
same.
my life. It completely changed my life, the way I look at people, bodies. But then at that time, I was really big on like strict total carbs, strict keto. No one needs carbs ever. No one, higher fat. You're just not giving it enough time, blah, 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 blah. And when I got out of school, the one thing that school taught me was the idea of bioindividuality. And I just started to look at people as individuals and keto as kind of like an abstract definition and not something that is just very objective and never changing. But it can change depending on the user. And I started to look at it like that. And that's when I got super obsessed with like metabolic health. And then I got really obsessed with women's health, just because of the lack of consideration they get in terms of the broadness that people try to teach this diet in. And that's how we got here.
I love it. What a powerful story. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing with us, because especially as a guy, because we hear a lot about eating disorders in women, but it's also very possible. And it happens that men struggle with the same issues. And oftentimes they're not as socialized to talk about feelings and, outwardly. So, that's why there's that really high rate statistic of death by suicide with men. And so we want to encourage our boys and our men to be talking openly. And I think that you sharing is like a beautiful step in just letting people, and granted, most of my followers are women, but just hearing that we need to hear these stories, and they're so, so important. And I think that even, I did have binging, and I will share something publicly that I've never shared before. When I was younger, I tried to purge. I tried to make myself throw up. I just couldn't do it. And I always used to say that my relationship with food was such that if I could have done it, if I could have been like bulimic, I would have, because I had that much of a disordered relationship with food. And I had those binging cycles and the guilt and the shame that came after it. And I also found so much healing through keto, because all of a sudden I think that it was a lot of just the blood sugar swings and the low blood sugar all the time. I wasn't nourished because I was eating all this low fat stuff. And then I would just crave, like, I just felt like my body needed nutrients. And then once I was in ketosis, I never experienced those binges again. So for me, I definitely had, full sort of remission of that issue, that symptom that I was experiencing. So getting your blood sugar really balanced. I know I had some other people in my program go through, they had eating disorder tendencies as well. And it's just what do you think it is that, I have my thoughts about what it is, but what do you think it is about ketosis that can really help with binge eating in particular?
Yeah, so I think that and of course, I think, let me preface, I think some of this is anecdotal. I think that there isn't a lot of literature on what I'm about to say. This is mostly purely from my experience, and then there's some science that I do believe backs this, but I really think that the way that our diet impacts our blood sugar regulation and our gut microbiome, those are the big ones, right? So blood sugar regulation, I think, is big, right? Because blood sugar, our body does create patterns of dopamine and insulin spikes and blood sugar spikes. And there is a level of, because we know that carbs can be used, and something I'm sure we'll dive in later, carbs can be used after keto to help, create lower cortisol, right? Well, there's a dopamine response to feeling less stress. There's serotonin going on there, right? So it makes sense that those two could interchange and become unhealthy, regulated in a really unhealthy way, unregulated, so to speak. And so I definitely think there's some blood sugar things, dips and crashes that lead to overeating. And then that overeating is what triggers that psychological response of an eating disorder. And I think it's a very simplified way of putting it, but I definitely think that blood sugar regulation plays a huge role. I think the bigger role is a gut microbiome. I think one reason why keto really helped me is because it helped reestablish my gut. Dr. David Perlmutter has a book, it's called Brain Maker. And something Biggie talks about on there, and something that really blew my mind, was just how involved our gut is with the production of serotonin, right? So for me, and this is different, right? Because I think also this is where it can get complicated, because we have to talk about where your eating disorder stems from, right? So my eating disorder stemmed from my body dysmorphia. I do not think eating disorders are root causes. They are symptoms. They are manifestations of something something else going on. Like, no one just wakes up and has binge eating disorder. They're using that to comfort themselves from something. They're using it to control themselves when they feel like they can't control, like whatever it is. There's a root cause, and that is the symptom. Well, my bulimia was a symptom of me having a very distorted view of myself, right? And so then I started looking, okay, well, then why is body dysmorphia a thing for me? Like, what is that? And that's when I really started, like, I think my final paper in the NTA was on keto's impact on body dysmorphia, because I became absolutely fascinated with it. Because so body dysmorphia is depression's ugly cousin, right? So a lot of people don't know this, but body dysmorphia is treated the same way depression and anxiety is, with SSRIs, with serotonin dumping agents, right? So we can see that body dysmorphia, depression, and anxiety all stem, it's just a different neurological manifestation of the same kind of imbalance, right? So then the question becomes, well, then what's causing that imbalance, right? And so if you're destroying your gut with ultra processed and sugary foods and you're creating imbalances and that cortisol in your body being inflamed and all that's just wreaking havoc on your gut, your body's not going to produce serotonin in the gut like it should. And 80% of your serotonin comes from your gut, right? So, and you're not getting outside, you're inside playing games all day because you're depressed and you don't like your life. That's also going to not let you, that's going to inhibit brain and gut serotonin, right? And so if you're not eating a lot of meat because you're eating a lot of processed garbage, that's also not going to help. Like there's so many things that an SAD does to your gut that literally inhibits the production of serotonin and the creation of a balanced mood. And so it's no wonder that so many people in my generation as millennials and then Gen Z, they literally are just depressed, obese, and sad, right? All of them. And it's literally, look at what they create environments where their body can't produce the one hormone that can make them feel balanced. And I
so
think
they seek it
really,
from this food, like you're saying, right? Because they eat that, then the ultra processed food is the only thing that can give them that chemical for a period of time, that hormone, so they could, or neurotransmitter, so they could feel good. And then it starts that cycle all over again. Is that what you're saying?
So they become what's called dopamine dependent, not serotonin stable. Totally just made that up on the fly, but that's how we're going to talk about it. Dopamine dependent instead of serotonin stable, right? So serotonin is a very stable hormone. Dopamine's very up and down. So they depend on that dopamine spike rather than just having an even mood from the serotonin because they don't produce any really at all. And so obviously keto helps for a lot of reasons. One, it lowers blood sugar irregularity, which helps with the lowering of inflammation and cortisol, which is going to help with the gut. You're also going to be eating a lot of whole foods, a lot of fibrous foods, especially at first if you're eating your veggies and you're keeping lower carb, but you're trying to eat veggies and stuff. You're going to feed your gut microbiome. If you're getting enough fats in, the butyrate and butter, going to feed your gut microbiome. But then also on top of that, you're eating a lot of meats, which is huge, very high in L-tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin in the gut, right, and in the brain. And then on top of that, you're probably going to be eating dairy because people on keto eat dairy. So you're going to get a lot more vitamin D. That's going to give you a lot more energy too, which is going to get you outside more, which is going to soak you in vitamin D again. And if you really want to take it up a notch, you start eating fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi. You start doing those things. Now you're really taking it over the top. But just say whole foods keto, like the keto people can do nowadays doesn't help with that all the time because there's a lot of keto junk out there. But when we first started, like a whole foods ketogenic diet can I'm not going to say it can reverse a neurological disorder. What I am saying is that in my life, what I noticed was that it gave me my psychological power back and it allowed me to start working on my root issues because it gave me I always say keto gave me the foundation to work on my headspace.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I think that it stables you out so much and it helps rebalance some of these hormones. It helps your gut modulate, and that is what will allow you. Then you had the space to do the, let's say, mental emotional work also maybe behind some of those issues that were driving the eating disorder and the body dysmorphia as well. So that's really helpful. And thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't realize about I didn't think about that like dopamine and serotonin response to the foods, how it helps to reduce cortisol. And so it's not surprising that those are the foods we're driven to. And for me, I think that it was from that, the idea that the blood sugar was dropping so much that you need that quick fuel, and that can really drive a binge. And so when you stabilize that and you can run on fats and you're fat fueled, you don't have those dips. You don't have that intense, urgent need for food, especially in the form of processed carbohydrates, which is really quick energy. So you don't ever get in a space where you're like, oh, I'm panicked, I have nothing. And you feel all those potential urges to overeat because you're like, quote unquote, starving. So John, you were saying that you learned a ton about female hormones, and also you mentioned some things that you're seeing people sort of do. I don't want to say the word wrong, but like ways that you wouldn't recommend doing ketosis. So I want to dive into these two areas. So let's continue with the keto discussion, because I think we're kind of talking about that. So where do you see people sort of going wrong from your perspective as a functional nutritional therapy practitioner? What would you advise these people to do a little bit differently?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and we've said this like 3 times, so get ready because it's coming again, is that they're not looking at themselves as individuals. They're looking at themselves as a member of a tribe. And while that is really good and we are natural tribal people, it helps us build community. It keeps us encouraged. It helps us with accountability. It helps us be committed. It's really important to understand that while nutrition is simple, you're an extremely complex being, especially nowadays, right? It's not like you're from a literal tribe and you have like one genetic ancestry. A lot of people that are on keto, a lot of people in America and other countries, like they're genetic mutts. We all are. We're all genetic mutts, right? We're a mix of everything, right? And that comes into play. Our genetics come into play. Our blood type comes into play. Our gut, where our guts are at comes in. It all comes into play. Our gender comes into play, right? All of that matters when it comes to how you eat. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming and complicated. What you have to do is be willing to take the time to take a step back and go, okay, how does keto fit into my life? Not how do I make my life keto? And I think those are two very different perspectives. And so like, for example, how could I make my life keto? And so I was very like strict total carbs. I was very like, I should say I'm still total carb, very strict total carb, but I was very low total carb, no matter what. Fat is king. Saturated fat is never bad under any circumstance. Protein is good, but you shouldn't have too much no matter what, because it can cause gluconeogenesis and da.
So
And
those strict rules, those strict like
I was very
one-liners.
rigid. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I used to tell
rigid.
clients not to put pepper on their food, Danny. I used to
Because
tell
of
them
the
not to put pepper.
oxalates?
Well, yeah, because there's 6 carbs per teaspoon. It was a big deal to me. Oh,
Oh
I'm
my
not kidding.
gosh.
I'm not kidding. Oh yeah, compared to who I am now, some of my old clients still give me a hard time when they see my post and they're like, "And you didn't let me put pepper on my food." I'm like, I know.
We live
But
and we learn, right?
yeah, we live and learn. I was very rigid, and I just, I don't know. Let's say I would help 20 people. I'd have 20 clients, and 17 of them would do great. They would just do great. And then there would be 2 or 3 of them that didn't do great, usually female. Very rare that I had a male that didn't just melt on low total carbs and high fat. It's almost, unless they have like a predisposed to like some kind of like hormonal condition, or they're an endurance athlete, which I didn't work with at that time. They just melt, right? So normally it was women, and for a couple times I was like, all right, they must not be following the program. Like that was my general, and I know a lot of coaches talk like that. And I just, at one point, I got fed up with it. I was like, no, I should be able to help these people. I need to understand how this works. There's something I'm missing something, right? And I just got out of school for the NTA. And I was like, okay, well, what is the individual? Let's dig into this. Well, what is the real science here? Okay, and so what are some things that people do wrong, right? Let's talk about that. So now this is individual based, meaning what I'm about to say, not everybody is doing wrong, right? So I'm just speaking from things I see people do wrong. People that fast way too much. That's one of the big ones. Fasting is this really unhealthy trend. And I think that a lot of people, I think there's a lot of, we could go a lot of routes with why it's bad, but I'll just name them and then we can dive whichever rabbit hole you want to go down with it. The first one is that people use it as a bulimic tendency and they don't even realize they're doing it. And it really irks me, especially as a former bulimic or a bulimic. They will eat bad and then they'll go on a 3-day fast challenge and they'll do this binge purge cycle that they're not even recognizing because everybody in their community is doing it too. I think that's really unhealthy. And I think it sparks a lot of issues. The second one is they treat fasting as the gold standard and not a tool. And I think that that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a tool and we have to understand exactly how that tool works and where that tool can go wrong. A lot of people, there's this idea that like fasting, like if you need to lose more weight or you need to trigger fat, like just fast. Cancer, fast. Headache, fast. Achy joints, fast. No matter what it is, you're late on your car payment, fast, right? Like everything's fasting. That's the answer to everything. And it really irks me because there's biological responses our body has to fasting that, while in some contexts can be beneficial, in some contexts they're not beneficial at all. It's not good. Second thing
Can
I
I
see is
pause you
not
right
enough
there?
protein. Yes.
Can I pause you there on the fasting topic? So this was
Yeah.
something that I used to fast when I first started keto. I loved fasting. I felt like it really helped with my weight loss, where I felt like if I didn't fast, I wasn't losing any weight. And even if I did ketosis, and it was really good for me. And I felt like I did it in a healthy-ish way, except for how I started fasting. I started keto with a 3-day water fast when I was clearly hypoglycemic, and that was really bad. Don't do that. But I noticed that sometimes if I did more fasting, it wouldn't feel as good. And I think that we have the tendency to think more is better with exercise, more is better, more in the sauna, more is better. And then with carbs, less is better. We have to, and I think the message you're saying is that we have to get away from that simplification of, we can't find ourselves saying more or less of something is better for the most part, because it has that, it's like that pendulum swing, or it's like a mountaintop where we want to find the peak threshold, the peak effectiveness, so the peak dose that's going to help us. And then more than that is not going to be good, and less than that is not going to be as good, right? So I love that you're bringing this up, because it's something that I've dialed back on significantly, because what was happening to me was that I was getting really cold when I would fast. And I was like, oh, I think I'm screwing up my thyroid. So I stopped fasting, and I don't do more than like an overnight fast or like a little bit of an early dinner. And that's about it. I don't do 2 meals anymore, because I don't feel that I need it. And I don't feel like my body is wanting that. And I think that, there was a big push for this for a long time, like fast, fast, fast. It's all over the place. People telling women fast 3 times a day, like 3 24-hour fasts a day. It's dangerous. Like fasting is a very powerful thing. So use it wisely, do your research, work with someone who can help you with this. And the idea of just fasting all the time, just because, it's just like exercise. We should be listening to our bodies. Like if you're waking up and you're feeling under the weather, maybe you need to change your HIIT workout or like strength training day to like a nice walk in the woods. And so same thing with fasting. I think some people are just like, I'm just going to fast no matter what. And, we're not taking into account the time of our menstrual cycle and all these things. So I love that point that we are now starting to tend to, I see a lot of people over fasting, and there's a lot of consequences to that. So the thyroid, losing hair, you want to talk about some more consequences to over fasting?
Yeah, I think chronic cortisol, I think muscle loss, I think, which kind of plays into the next tip, but the next thing that goes wrong. But yeah, like muscle loss, I think metabolic disruption, sex hormone downregulation, thyroid downregulation, as you said, downregulation of the immune system. People don't want to talk about how fasting can wreck your immune system. No one wants to talk about that. Well, because you're not nourishing your body. Like realize that like your B and T cells are made out of their cell membranes are made out of fatty acids that are essential. So if you're not eating those and you're stressing your body out because you're fasting too much, you're immune compromising yourself. That doesn't mean, and fasting can be good for the immune system. Autophagy is great, but in context and in the right balance. So I think I see people like fast for like a challenge, and then the next week they get sick and then they start fasting again. And it's like, so yeah, so I would say those are the big ones, is like all those kinds of metabolic and hormonal downregulations that can really put you in a bad situation that you have to like dig your way out of.
I agree. What's the next one?
So the next one was lack of eating protein, which I think is one of the caveats from the fasting, because it suppresses appetite, which is supposed to be like the thing that makes keto great. And something I've come to realize, especially with women, it's not good that you're never hungry. If I can't get you to get your protein in, we need like when I first encourage women to introduce carbohydrates, they start to get hungry and it freaks them out. They're like, I'm hungry, John, I'm hungry today. And I'm like, eat. And they're like, what? And I'm like, eat. Your body's excited. It finally feels like it can eat. Like give it some nourishment. Like being hungry is okay. You're not supposed to never feel hungry. That's ludicrous. Like, okay, I don't want to go on a crazy rant, but it really irks me, especially because like I've gotten really into Paleolithic keto. Like I really care about ancestral health. And so I've done a lot of studying on it. And yes, our ancestors fasted because they had to. And yes, do we have biological processes that benefit from us fasting? Absolutely. But they weren't hungry. Their body suppressed their appetite so that they could go hunt something and feast. Lots of food when they would eat too. And they just wouldn't eat one day. They'd feast for 3, 4, 5 days straight, and then they go kill something else, right? It wasn't like they wouldn't go 3 days without eating if they couldn't help it, right? And so they were hungry. Our ancestors got hungry. So this idea that like appetite suppressing is good is not, it's just not true. You should have an appetite. And yes, is it good to like suppress it a bit when you're trying to lose weight? Absolutely, trying to lose fat. But like over the long haul, if you're not doing anything to stimulate your appetite, you're gonna undereat. You're gonna undereat, and it's gonna cause long-term metabolic issues, and you're gonna have to fight yourself through that. And I think one of the biggest issues I see is appetite suppression causing lack of protein in the space, because getting some women to eat over 100 grams of protein is like, it's very difficult, right? And it's not their fault, because they were taught to do it a certain way and it worked for them fat loss wise, but now they're trying to like gain muscle, but they're worried about gaining fat back. They don't want to see the scale go up. They don't want to feel hungry because they were taught that that's bad. And it's like, just like doing all these healthy things, but the rhetoric and the dogma that's infused mentally behind those things, and not those things not being taught properly, leads to this really bad barrier that we have to break in order for them to see progress on the other side of things.
Yeah, that's really important. And one of the things that I've been doing, that I've been focusing on, because I'm realizing the power of protein, because when you first, start doing keto, it's like, don't eat too much protein, because you're gonna, spike your blood sugar because of gluconeogenesis. And I was a little bit afraid of protein. Of course, as I'm starting to had started to learn more, I was improving and increasing my protein intake. And now I'm really focused on it. And I find that if I don't eat all the protein first and I start eating something else, then I won't be able to finish all of the protein. So I just want to give a quick tip to the listeners. Eat your protein first, because it's arguably the most important thing you're going to eat. And so just finish that until you really can't eat another bite of protein. You're like, that is just enough. And then start eating the other types of foods. So vegetables and carbs, because you don't want to fill up on a salad and then you didn't get any and then you're like, oh, I'm just going to have a few bites of protein. Like, really prioritize that protein. And I would say have it first and think about it throughout the day, like getting enough protein all the time. And I do talk to people about, sort of the other end where they're hungry all the time. That's another sign that you need more protein. So you talked about like not having an appetite, which is very common, but also the flip end of that. If you are like constantly hungry, chances are one of the potential causes is that you're not eating enough protein. So prioritize getting a good portion of animal protein at every meal. And then the other thing is that if you're like peckish and you're jonesing for a snack or something like that, and you aren't hungry for, like, let's say a steak or some fish or some chicken or something, you might not be hungry, right? It might be just sort of a craving. So I think that true hunger is really when you're like, yeah, I need protein, and you eat it and it feels really satiating. What do you think?
No, I absolutely agree. And I think too, like, and let me also give another tip here. If you're scared of gluconeogenesis, you need to stop, right? You are, for a couple of reasons, or kicking yourself out of ketosis. One, your body is, why you don't go hypoglycemic and go into a coma when you're on keto? Because your body is constantly doing gluconeogenesis. This idea that gluconeogenesis just happens when you eat too much protein, I used to think like that. It's not how it works. Your body, like right now, if you're keto right now, if you're fasting right now, your body's doing, that's what's keeping your blood sugar stable. Your body still uses glucose. So if it uses it 30%, even when you're fasting, your brain uses 30% driven on glucose. So it's pulling it from your blood. So how is your blood staying stable? It's staying stable because your body's replenishing it by doing gluconeogenesis, right? Like your body's constantly doing it. So this idea that just eating too much protein is going to do it is not true. Now, there is warrant to, like, if you eat too much protein and not enough fat, and there's like this small drift of extra glucose, that it could make you feel tired. Totally get that. Just make sure that, but don't be afraid of protein. Just try to figure out what makes you feel good and what doesn't. Right. Secondly, and I think there's some gut issues there too, because I have thoughts on that, but we don't have to get in that today. But the second thing is that you kick yourself out of ketosis all the time. Like when people say, "Oh, I've never been out of ketosis," they're liars. I mean, sorry, you're a liar. You're a liar. When you wake up, you kick yourself out of ketosis. When you work out, you kick yourself out of ketosis. When you yell at the kids, you kick yourself out of ketosis. Get in a fight with your spouse, have a bad day at work, you're busy, you're stressed out. All of those will kick you out. Most people kick themselves out 5 or 6 times a day. They just only get these fasted random numbers throughout the day when they're relaxed. If you had a continuous ketone monitor, if that ever comes out, people are going to start losing their crap on social media.
They are.
So like, stop not doing it because of those two reasons, because those two reasons are just not, they're not stable. They're not stable reasons. When you actually break it down biologically, they make absolutely no sense. They're just fun for people to say because they're catchy and sound cool. Like, well, don't eat protein because you're going to trigger gluconeogenesis even though you're already triggering it, or don't get ketogenic ketosis even though you did it 5 minutes ago. Like that doesn't make sense. So anyways, those are my thoughts on it.
Love that. Love that. And so you also worked with, as a bodybuilder bodybuilding or,
Yeah, I did. I
and
dabbled in it for 2 years. I would never, at the time I was like, I'm an amateur, but I would never like consider myself like, I was never like really immersed in the sport. No.
right. Well, I think but you do know about building muscle on keto. And can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think that some people, maybe we are under eating protein and not able to put on muscle. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to building muscle, I think two things. I think one, you need protein and you need a stimulus, right? So you do not need carbohydrates to build muscle. That is true, right? And any human, bioindividuality, focused or not, you technically do not need carbohydrates to build muscle. Biologically speaking, you only need protein and you need a stimulus. Now, when it comes to that stimulus, because I think getting enough protein, I would say eat 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, right? So if your ideal body weight is 140, you need to eat 140 grams of protein at the minimum, right? So like even on keto, and if that makes your fat macros like at 60% of your ratio, fine. Hit the protein goal if you want to build muscle. The second thing is the stimulus. And I think I run into this often is people do not work out hard enough. Like I run into that a lot, especially because like all my clients, like, and trust me, this is not a knock on women because I've been clients in the past and friends of mine that are men that do it too. But more often when I'm working with my clients, which are predominantly women, because that's just what I specialize in, we have to have a really stern talking about the intensity of their workouts. Because the reality is that your body is an adaptive biological unit, meaning that it adapts to what it feels like it has to adapt to. If I just pick up this bottle, right, this bottle here that I'm holding, it's a supplement and it weighs 10 ounces, right? My body is not going to adapt to me lifting this. There's no need. It can handle it just fine, right? Now, if I buy a 200-pound dumbbell and I try to lift it right here, which would be impossible, eventually my body is going to get better at picking it up because it's like, you're trying to kill me. I need to respond to this. It's no different than when we're lifting weights. A lot of people go in there and they get their heart rate real high. They do a bunch of HIIT workouts and they sweat. Like the big key, the key to a workout is that you're sore and you sweat, right? Like if you sweat, you walk out with a sweat stain, whoo, like that's great. No, it's not great. I know people that don't sweat at all because they work out with large breaks in between lifts and they get strong. They build crazy amounts of muscle. It's because when they lift like their life depends on it. That last rep sucks. And I think a lot of people don't want that. They try to develop habits in the gym by making it enjoyable. And I do agree, it should be enjoyable, but what should be more enjoyable, in my opinion, is the results that come after, because it just, people just don't work out hard enough. And here's the thing too, if you're somebody on keto, and let's say that you don't have the energy to work out that hard. Let me say, like, if I'm talking to a client and they're like, oh, well, I just don't have the energy to work out that hard, John. Like what you're talking about is crazy. Like I've went and met a client at a gym and worked out with them and showed them what I meant. And they were like, oh my God, like, no, I haven't been doing this at all. Like, and it wasn't crazy. It was just extra weight. It was like adding an extra 10 pounds and making that last rep hurt. There's little things, right? It's not like you have to be like on the floor, like, like dying and convulsing. But like there's a level of intensity that should come. And for them, like they just, people are like, oh, I don't have the energy. I'm like, well, if you're doing strict keto and fasting and you're super stressed out and your body's having metabolic issues, that's where carbs can be beneficial, right? Some people I know, it matters because if they ingest like a simple carb, like a honey or something, like right before their workout, and that glucose fuels the workout instead of their own body trying to demand it in the moment, they have a lot more energy to bust through that workout. And by the end of that workout, that glucose is gone anyways. Like an hour after that workout, they're going to be in ketosis. That the glucose never existed, but their body didn't stress out with more cortisol trying to create its own glucose. And they had the energy throughout the workout right there to really push themselves and develop the muscle. So I would say protein and an intense stimulus. And then if you need extra fuel to create the environment in which you feel energized enough to actually create that stimulus, then go for it. That would be my long-winded response.
I love that. I love that. Two things about that. The first is that when I first went to the gym with my wife, she was a personal trainer. She
Mhm.
was like jacked when I met her, and she would just rip, 10 pull-ups like right in the gym. I'm just like, oh,
Wow.
like strict pull-ups. I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Awesome.
And the way that she worked out, I would watch her face, like the effort that she put in. I was like, just like what you said, I'm like, I'm not working out hard enough.
Yeah.
And I sometimes will have to channel LJ, my wife, and be like, okay, like, are you working out hard enough? Because when I work out with her, I see how intensely she works out. I'm like, geez, I'm like, okay, push yourself harder, because it's hard to push yourself to a level, or even know that you need to push yourself to the safest, greatest effort. And sometimes it can be scary to pick up something that's so heavy. Like, it doesn't necessarily always feel safe. So if you
Mhm.
need to work with some sort of a trainer, I'm personally
Mhm.
working with a mobility trainer right now to get my joints ready to be able to lift heavy, because I took some time off and I kept getting injured. Because now I really like to, go ham in the gym when I'm lifting. Like, my every rep is engaged on the way up, on the way down, really slow and controlled. And because I want to be building muscle, but I was tending to injure myself. So if you find that, really work with someone who can help you.
Mhm.
But the other thing is, you were talking about having the glucose or the simple carb before a workout. What would you say? And then you were talking about the cortisol spike. What would you say about someone who's seeing a cortisol spike, blood sugar spike, when they are working out? Like, what's your take on that? What is the bioindividuality with that? Is that okay? Is it not? Does it depend?
So it's absolutely okay. It's biologically normal when your body, any kind of intense workout, endurance wise or lifting wise, you're going to deplete glycogen. And so your body's going to respond to that. One, it's going to respond with cortisol because you're lifting, your
It's a
body weight or
stressor.
more on your back. It's just stressful.
Mhm.
Two, though, it does that because and what does your body do when it releases cortisol? It creates sugar, because sugar is that quick energy to get away from this stressful thing. And then on top of that, your body's also going to create glucose to replenish that glycogen, right? So it's releasing a lot of cortisol and a lot of glucose to deal with to meet the demand, right? I would say that the less breaks a workout has, the more cortisol and blood sugar response you're going to get, right? Like running and heart. And let me also preface, heart rate like how high your heart rate gets matters here too, because if you're an aerobic base, you're not going to be near as intense, like in terms of cardio, right? So if you're doing like a HIIT workout, your heart rate's a lot higher, and it's going to induce a lot more of a glycogen carbohydrate based environment in your body. So you're going to deplete more glycogen. There's going to be a stronger cortisol response. That's why, like when I'm working with women that have like cortisol issues, we don't do HIIT cardio for a while, because we have to like take that out because it's just too much. And
Mhm.
then lifting weights too can cause cortisol. But the thing about lifting weights is if you take proper breaks in between sets, it's not as intense cortisol wise as like HIIT, because you have those breaks. So your body's not constantly just like go, go, go. It gets that time to, relax, right? Like I've done a continuous glucose monitor while I'm watching like a tempo run where like, cause I train for ultras, and like there'll be runs where like I run like super fast the whole time. And I watch my glucose monitor just go a steep decline. I'll get into like the
Mhm.
50s or 40s where it just drinks my sugar. And then once I rest, boom, it just spikes. It has a strong response to it. And then I'll watch a workout where I'll be lifting, and the blood sugar within my first set will rise like 30 points and then just stay there for almost the remainder of the workout. So
I've
like
seen that too.
there's a much
That
stronger
second one.
response to endurance based stuff, because your body doesn't get a chance to stop and replenish. It has to replenish after the entire bout, which causes a much stronger response from the body. So all that saying, it's all
Interesting.
completely normal, completely natural for all that to happen. My issue is that when that can go wrong is when that's the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. When that's the thing that sends your body over the edge, right? Because if you have a strong cortisol response to your cycle, maybe you're going through menopause, you have a stressful life, you have a career, you got 3 kids, right? All these things that I call involuntary stressors you can't just get rid of. And then you're doing keto, and then you're fasting, and then you work out really, really hard. you're pushing cortisol is just kind of coming off the edge there. That's when it can become a problem because you're just having chronic cortisol leak. And then that's going to keep blood, because the cortisol is oozing out so much constantly. It's going to create, remember, because cortisol releases glucose. So you're going to get elevated blood sugar chronically, which kind of creates this this physiological insulin resistance, where you're creating like the same pattern you had before you went keto because of the amount of cortisol. So you have two options. You either get rid of the stressors or you implement something into your diet that reduces the cortisol. And sometimes it takes both, right? We can cut back on the workouts, but it's like, well, I want to build muscle. Yeah, well, you have a really stressful cycle and you have a really stressful life. So, and you want to be keto, so you can't work out, because if you work out, your body just fails on you. Or better option, I'm just saying, this is a better option, people. You include some strategic carbohydrates, which we know clinically suppresses cortisol because of that glucose intervention. And you're able to work out and you're able to manage your stress well, because you're able to burn fat better because your body's more relaxed when it's not eating carbs, because it knows that it has that intermittently. And that's where carbs can come in and be super beneficial for somebody. And that's where, like, if the working out is causing too much cortisol, that can come in and keep them from being, it allows them to live their lives and enjoy their ketogenic diet, but in a more bioindividual way, where they can kind of deal with the cortisol responses of everything that they're trying to do in life.
Love that. That's so helpful. So tell us, what would be some bullet points of some important things that you feel like women don't know about their cycles, and how this might be related to their maybe a ketogenic diet? So how is the ketogenic diet impacting us, or what, just something you're called to talk about? I know you know so much, and I know we're almost out of time, so I feel like I want to kind of leave this next topic up to you.
Yeah, no. Okay. So what do I think that women need to know when it comes to their cycles? One, I think just understanding your cycle is super important. I know you talk about this, right? Like understanding your follicular phase, your ovulation, your luteal phase, like understanding those things is super important. Understanding your hormones, like estrogen is much higher during your follicular phase. Progesterone starts to creep up during your luteal phase, blah, blah, blah. What's really important to understand about that is, like, so for instance, right, like, and I think it's really important that we remove like social, social understanding, and we just look at this from like a biological perspective to really understand this. The first 2 weeks of your cycle, your body is trying to find a mate. Sorry, that's just how it is. Your body wants to reproduce, right? It's just your body revolves on that 28-day cycle. And so your estrogen's higher, your testosterone's higher, you're able to lift heavy as hell. Your muscles are more elastic because estrogen helps with stretch. It helps with the elasticity of your muscle. Your body wants to be toned. It wants to be attractive. Like the first 2 weeks is the best time to try and lose body fat. And I would say that, like, I think a lot of women, they get really upset when, like, towards the end of their beginning of their cycle, they start to gain weight because of water retention and fluid, and they start really crash dieting at that point because they get mad at the scale and they just mess up their hormones going into their next cycle. So I think understanding this is super important. I just want to preface that before I kept going. So, like, understanding, like, the best time is like follicular phase, and then the week after ovulation is not bad either, because obviously your body's like gearing up because it thinks it might be pregnant, right? The egg drop, it's waiting for all that to happen. And so that's like the best time to, like, if you're going to be a little bit more low carb, if you are going to fast, obviously don't overdo it, because especially if you know you have cortisol issues, work with a coach, figure that out, right? Don't just wing this. But if you're good, then those are the best times to do those things. Lift heavy, eat a lot of meat, fast if you want, and just, really focus on those goals. That last week, though, then in that luteal phase, right? That's where, like, it's really beneficial to, like, if you're not already cycling in carbs weekly, increase your carbs maybe for the rest of your cycle until you start. 100 grams a day can be super beneficial. If you're worried about that and you've never done it before and you're listening, don't start with 100. The first day, do 30, then 40, then 50. I would say go until you start to feel better. You start to feel less joint pain. You start to feel less mood swings. You start to feel a little bit more better overall. But 100 is, unless you're working with somebody, if you are going to just wing this after listening to me, I would say 100 grams is probably, I don't see a point in going over that, but some people need to, but that would be like generic, broad advice. I would do that for the last week of the cycle, because you want to because that's when cortisol is the highest, because your body's like getting ready to, like, let it go. And then all your hormones are going to dump. And so if cortisol is super high, that's going to keep eating from things that are already getting lowered, and then just causes a really bad recovery process when you first first start your cycle. So those are the things I would want a female to know, that the first 3 weeks, capitalize, the last week, nourish and replenish and get ready for your next cycle. And don't stress some of the small things, which is really hard to do in the health and fitness place, because everything's focused on the small things like little weight fluctuations and all that. But try not to focus on the
What about
small
your blood
things.
sugar going up a little bit on that last week? Because
Yeah,
a lot of
don't stress
people
about that.
will be like, oh my gosh, I'm like, my blood sugar was so good, except this last week, it's been really terrible. And so I probably shouldn't eat carbs. It's like, we're a little bit more insulin resistant during that time because our estrogen goes so low, right? And so we don't have the best carbohydrate tolerance, but we need them the most at that time.
Yeah,
So what would you
absolutely.
advise?
Oh, I would advise to eat them. I would just eat them, like
Yeah.
literally, like I would just eat them. And you can play with carbs. Like in my opinion, if you're going to introduce them, and you need to, play with them, make it fun. Like try, like, okay, what does sweet potato do to me? What is white? I guess what I do with my clients when I'm first introducing carbs to them, it's like, let's play with different foods, right? What does this do to you? What does this do? Let's learn. Let's see. Like I know clients are like, 60 carbs in a meal is great. For others, it does an enormous response. But if they go down to 40, they have no response, right? Like it's like learning those things. Use this as an opportunity to get to know exactly what your body wants and needs. But I wouldn't avoid it just because you're worried about the blood sugar response, because like you said, our body still needs the carbs. Now, one thing you can do, I wouldn't work out as intense that last week because your estrogen's super low. And that's when most injuries happen for women, because they're not as flexible, they're not as limber. So make sure you're doing a good stretch routine and you're taking it a bit easy in the gym. Make that like your break week or whatever, and just go in there and do light weights, lots of reps, and then hit it hard the next week, right? Like just give your body that break. But what you can do is you can have those carbs that you're worried about eating immediately before and then after your workouts, or immediately after your workout. And that way it's in your system and your body uses it before you can even blink.
Going for walks
That way you're not
after.
over stressing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. These are all such great tips, John. Thank you so much for sharing. And I feel like we could, of course, have a part 2 and dive even more into this, but tell people where they can find you.
Absolutely. So you can find me at the Keto Road on Instagram. When my website is called the Keto Road. We have one-on-one coaching. We have a free Get Started resource where it has a bunch of different stuff, free shopping list, PDFs, recipes, all that jazz. And then you can also find me on TikTok if you want to watch me eat raw meat, which is a whole nother subject. Primal_metabolism is my TikTok. And then I have a supplement company that I just launched called Performance Gains. It's spelled PERFORMNCE, and then Gains, GAINZ. You can .com that, or you can find that on Instagram if you just plug it in. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
I'm so excited to try your new supplement, and we will definitely link everything in the show notes. You have a special guide for our listeners that I'm going to link there. Can you tell us more about that guide, or is that the one we talked about?
You reminded me. Thank you. Yeah.
So the Primal Woman Guide.
I released the Primal Woman Guide. It is a free 3-step metabolic fix guide. It is there to help women that have been stuck on a low carb ketogenic diet and don't know what to do. 3 really simple steps just to get started, to understand how to help activate that metabolism and make them feel a little bit better. It's a 14-page PDF. It's in depth. I've wrote it out myself, designed it myself. It's absolutely free. Just go in, give your information, and we'll send you a bunch of other tips and info and things that you could also get afterwards once you sign up for it. So yeah, awesome. You can get that at theketoroad.com/primalwoman, no spaces.
Yep, I have that linked in the show notes as well. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. And thanks so much for being here today, John.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.